The world has always been home to strange creatures, but the strangest of all are the ones we will never see alive again. Imagine a day so ancient, the sunlight feels different, somehow more raw, more immediate. No towns, no roads, just an untamed planet humming with life, its voice made of wind, water, and the slow, patient creak of trees that have never known an axe. The air carried scents we cannot name, the resinous tang of towering ferns, the metallic salt lifted from a sea whose currents have long since changed. Under that sky, life moved in shapes that would make modern eyes do a double take. In the shallow Cambrian seas swam a creature called Opabinia, 7 centimeters long, yet every bit as strange as a conjured beast. 5 eyes sat on the top of its head like a cluster of stars. A long, flexible proboscis ended in a little claw, and it waved and probed the seabed like a machine probing for secrets. What did it see with those 5 eyes? What sense did that tiny claw find as it sifted through mud and detritus? It is hard to imagine, and yet the fossils whisper of a world both alien and ordinary.
Close enough to terror was Anomalocaris. Not a whale, not a fish, but an arthropod predator with grasping spines and a circular mouth ringed with serrated plates. Over 1/2 meter long, it was an ancient hunter, swift, precise, and utterly relentless. When it moved, the sea around it trembled with a predator's confidence. The Cambrian Ocean was a theatre of experimentation, bizarre body plans, new modes of feeding, eyes like compound jewels. It was a time when evolution was not cautious. It was frantic, inventive, and sometimes wildly extravagant. On the silty seafloor, Hallucigenia crawled with stick-like legs and spines on its back, a living contradiction that baffled paleontologists for decades. Which way was up? Which way was forward? The question itself became part of the mystery. These creatures did not exist to shock us. They simply lived, feeding, mating, avoiding predators, and reproducing. But to our modern minds, they seem like messages from another world. And yet, somewhere beyond the glint of those ancient eyes, the clock was ticking. Continents were on the move. Volcanoes breathed. The chemistry of the seas altered with quiet cruelty. If you peer closely at the fossil record, you can read the tension. Species rise like new actors onto a stage. They flourish. They perform brilliant acts of adaptation. Then, often without warning, the curtains fall. The calm before the great changes is deceptive. The air still smells of salt and fern. The water is glassy and clear, but there is a current of change beneath every surface. Centuries became millennia, and with that steady push came new giants and stranger designs. Pachycephalosaurus walked in a world of plains and forests, its skull a thick, domed cap of bone, sometimes 25 centimeters of solid helmet. Was it a battering ram, a display, a buffer against falls? We will never know for sure, and that uncertainty itself becomes part of the creature's legend. Stethocanttus swam in Devonian seas, a shark with a dorsal fin shaped like an anvil, odd, bristling, and covered in tooth-like denticles. To see it glide past would have been to watch a finned sculpture of threat and beauty. Every unusual structure had a reason, even if that reason remains a stubborn mystery to us. Therizinosaurus carried claws longer than a man's arm, yet it was not the slayer their claws suggest. It stood like an odd herbivore, plucking and stripping leaves with ungainly elegance. Claws can be for killing, or they can be for gathering. In evolution, form can wear many hats.
And high above them soared Quetzalcoatlus,
With a wingspan rivaling small aircraft, it walked awkwardly on land like a giant stilted bird. Its shadow could chill the light, and its beak could spear a small animal in a heartbeat. The skies were no refuge from the eccentric designs of life. The shallow seas hosted Jaekelopterus, a sea scorpion that could grow over 2 meters. Its claws were formidable pincers that closed with crushing strength. It would have been an ambush predator in brackish shallows, an allied terror to the fish and smaller arthropods it hunted. Mosasaurus dominated the open ocean later on, a snake-like marine reptile capable of bursts of speed and powerful crushing bites, a predator that made the sea itself feel dangerous. And yet, unfamiliar though these forms are, there was a rhythm to them, an ecology humming with the same basic rules. Energy flows, predators chase, prey hide. The oddness is a layer on top of life's fundamental heartbeat. But as the age of giant advanced, the planet itself began to tilt into new moods. Climate cooled in pockets and warmed in others. Sea levels rose, fell, and stagnated again. Volcanic outgassing changed chemistry in the air and the seas. When the balance shifted, even the most bizarre designs could not always cope. Strangeness, it turns out, can be fragile.
The fossil record shows it plainly. Species that seemed invincible vanish in thin slices of geological time. New species appear almost overnight in the deep timescale. Evolution is a braid of chance and necessity, and the strangest threads sometimes fray first. Ask yourself this: what would you favour, to be adaptable and plain, or strange and specialised? The question haunts every fossil bed. We stand at the edges of these ancient theatres as spectators, reading the bones and shells like weathered letters. They tell a story of innovation and of loss. They tell us that the very oddities we revere were also the vulnerable. But the story is far from over. If anything, it is just warming up. The stage is set for acts of escalation. Predators grow bolder, bodies become bigger, and the consequences grow louder. And that escalation brings us to the brink of annihilation and to the most dramatic exits of all. And the first of them had a skull like a helmet from another world. This is where the escalation begins. The stage darkens, the stakes grow higher. Imagine a world where rivers run thick with predators that blur the line between fish and reptile. A creature called Dunkleosteus tore through Devonian waters with jaw plates like shearing sides. Its armour was a living tank of bone and plate, and when it bit down, the force would have snapped the spines of lesser fish like twigs.
In the shallows, Diplodocus lurked with its boomerang-shaped skull. What purpose did that strange head serve? To stabilise? To ward off predators? To slice through mud? Paleontologists argue, and the skull keeps it secret. The great sweep of evolution kept inventing odd solutions. Some creatures headed back to the water, and in doing so became the ancestors of whales. Anomalocaris, the walking whale, moved from land into sea with a gait like a crocodile learning to swim. It could stalk at the water's edge, lunging with a power that feels eerily modern. Then came Basilosaurus, an elongated whale of the Eocene, a serpent of the sea with tiny hind limbs. Its body, a long, sinuous corridor of muscle. It swam like a tunnel through water, and beneath the surface it was an ambush engine. On land, the weirdness became a public spectacle. Dinosaurs, a dinosaur known first from gigantic mysterious arms, later revealed a broad bulky body and a hump of fat or muscle. Its arms were like living cranes, and its diet seemed to mix plants with whatever chance provided. When the full skeleton was found, it rewrote the story behind an odd fossil.
In deserts and plains, a Margosaurus bore twin spines along its neck, a double row of quills that might have borne skin sails or display structures. What spectacle it would have been at dawn, necks arched, spines catching the low light like flags on a battlefield. And then there is the whale-sized flight of Argentavis, a bird whose wingspan may have exceeded 6 meters.
It rode thermals above ancient plains like a silent winged king, descending to snatch up carrion or a small live prey with the casual brutality of a top predator. Some designs seem almost deliberately perverse. Take Helicoprion, a shark relative with a spiral of teeth inside its lower jaw, a whirl of serrated blades that continued adding new teeth in a dizzying spiral. How did such an arrangement work? Scientists have proposed feeding mechanics that would have shredded soft-bodied prey, but the image of a whirling buzzsaw in a jaw remains unsettling. The more you look, the more the planet reads like an artist's fever dream. Yet every innovation had a cost. Spinosaurus stalked river systems with a sail-backed silhouette unlike any other giant carnivore. It hunted in water as much as on land, its crocodilian snout filled with conical teeth made for spearing fish. Was it a land predator? A fisher? A new ecological type altogether? Its bones argue a complicated life and a new chapter in the story of predation.
Meanwhile, Ankylosaurus carried its defense in a living club, an armor-plated body and a tail ending in a bony hammer. Imagine the thud of that tail swinging into flesh and bone. It was the ironclad tank of the Cretaceous. But the biological theatre enjoyed no audience for long. The planet itself began to rehearse its next act. Volcanic eruptions thundered, sea levels shifted like a nervous tide. Ecosystems that had evolved over millions of years began to fray under changing climates and shifting continents. The stress accumulated in the oceans as oxygen levels fluctuated. Anoxic events coloured seas with chemical poison, wiping out entire ecological communities in thin slivers of time. When the waters turned, the bottom feeders died first, and the collapse crept upwards like rot. What would you do if your world became a series of smaller worlds? How do predators adapt when prey vanishes from one stretch of coastline to another? When food webs collapsed, the strange and the specialized faltered. Those built for narrow niches found themselves stranded without the exact food or environment they needed. Adaptability mattered more than novelty. Yet sometimes the planet's fury was quick and drastic. Impacts from space, colossal volcanic provinces, sudden shifts in sea chemistry, any of these could rewrite life's rulebook in the blink of a geological eye. At the end of the Cretaceous, the asteroid impact was that blink. In an instant, the sky darkened and the world burned and froze in cruel succession. The immediate effects were horrific. Blast waves, global fires, tsunamis that circled oceans, and an eerie darkness as dust and soot swallowed sunlight. What followed was a planetary winter. Photosynthesis faltered, the food chain collapsed. But extinction is a brutal filter, and in its wake, survivors found space to expand.
Dinosaurs, the great rulers of their age, fell silent, apart from the avian line, which survived and would be our modern birds. Non-avian dinosaurs vanished in great numbers, their bones scattered like symbols of a stopped clock. What odd forms disappeared with them? There was Beelzebufo, the horned frog capable of swallowing small vertebrates whole. There was Pterodalstro, its countless needle-like teeth perfect for filter feeding in lakes and lagoons. There were ammonites, the spiraled marine mollusks that had been a mainstay of oceanic life for hundreds of millions of years, all gone in the sweep of a geological breath. And yet, after the blackout, life rearranged itself. Mammals, once small and marginal, became the protagonists of the next act. They diversified into the niches left behind: grazers, hunters, diggers, and flyers. It is an odd symmetry. The world clears, and then new stories begin. But mass extinctions are not the only way the strangest go. Some perish by inches, by slow environmental shifts, by the creeping hand of competition, by the subtle loss of habitat. Megalodon, that oceanic colossus, likely faded as ocean temperatures cooled and prey patterns shifted. Its massive body, once an asset, became a liability in a changing sea. We piece together these fates from shards of evidence. Toothware tells us of diet. Isotope ratios whisper about migration and climate. Bone pathologies hint at disease or injury. The bones are not just relics, they are journals, written in calcium and time.
The more we study, the more patterns emerge. Specialization can be a miracle and a trap. Extreme adaptations win when conditions match the niche, but they fall rapidly when conditions change. And there is a modern mirror to these ancient truths. In the space of a few centuries, human activity has altered climate, carved habitats into fragments, and moved species around the globe with dizzying speed. Species vanish under pressures that have few precedents in the fossil record for their speed and breadth. If the ancient extinctions were chapters of slow geological drama, ours reads like a hurried final act. What will future paleontologists read in our strata? Will they find a sudden layer rich with plastics and ash? Will they read the signatures of shifting isotopes and loss? What odd forms of life today will become tomorrow's fossils? Even in untouched corners of the planet, unknown species may exist. Deep-sea trenches, subterranean caverns, and dense tropical canopies may harbour life that makes even Opabinia look conservative. If we value the thrill of discovery, we must also accept the responsibility of stewardship. But before the final curtain falls, the tension reaches a peak. Species that once seemed indomitable begin to thin. Populations fragment. Breeding becomes rare. The signature of collapse shows in bone and tooth. This is where we see the end of giants, the quiet dying of oddities. Their bodies remain as riddles for us to puzzle over. We reconstruct their last days from teeth marks, from stomach contents, from isotopes, and from the weathered shapes of their bones. It is a detective story written in limestone.
What will remain of us if our turn comes? What echo will our era leave in some future fossil bed? A cliffhanger, because the end is coming and it will be spectacular. And now we reach the climax. The slow burn of change becomes a conflagration. The planet's narratives converge into endings both swift and terrible. The Permian extinction, long before the dinosaurs rose to fame, collapsed a life in a way that dwarfs most modern disasters. Scientists call it the Great Dying. 90% of marine species and a similar proportion of terrestrial life vanished in a sequence of climatic horrors: volcanic outpourings, runaway greenhouse gases, ocean acidification, and oxygen loss. Imagine forests going blank, seas turning toxic, entire ecosystems folding like paper under heat and poison. In those dark waters, trilobites, once ubiquitous and diverse arthropods, dwindled to extinction. Their spiny carapaces, which had looked invincible for hundreds of millions of years, were finally outclassed by planetary chemistry. When the Great Wave passed, it left a quieter but still brilliant world behind. But the most famous and dramatic of all extinctions came at the end of the Cretaceous. 66 million years ago, an object from space, a 10-kilometre-wide asteroid, slammed into Earth with unfathomable force. The impact site, the Chicxulub crater, marks a scar across time. The immediate effects were horrific: blast waves, global fires, tsunamis, and an eerie darkness as dust and soot swallowed sunlight.
What followed was a planetary winter. Photosynthesis faltered, the food chain collapsed. But extinction is a brutal filter, and in its wake, survivors found space to expand. Dinosaurs, the great rulers of their age, fell silent, apart from the avian line, which survived and would be our modern birds. Non-avian dinosaurs vanished in great numbers, their bones scattered like symbols of a stopped clock. What odd forms disappeared with them? There was Beelzebub, the horn frog capable of swallowing small vertebrates whole. There was Pterodalstro, its countless needle-like teeth perfect for filter feeding in lakes and lagoons. There were ammonites, the spiraled marine mollusks that had been a mainstay of oceanic life for hundreds of millions of years, all gone in the sweep of a geological breath. And yet, after the blackout, life rearranged itself. Mammals, once small and marginal, became the protagonists of the next act.
They diversified into the niches left behind: grazers, hunters, diggers and flyers. It is an odd symmetry. The world clears and then new stories begin. But mass extinctions are not the only way the strangest go. Some perish by inches, by slow environmental shifts, by the creeping hand of competition, by the subtle loss of habitat. Megalodon, that oceanic colossus, likely faded as ocean temperatures cooled and prey patterns shifted. Its massive body, once an asset, became a liability in a changing sea.
We piece together these fates from shards of evidence. Tooth wear tells us a diet. Isotope ratios whisper about migration and climate. Bone pathologies hint at disease or injury. The bones are not just relics, they are journals, written in calcium and time. The more we study, the more patterns emerge. Specialization can be a miracle and a trap. Extreme adaptations win when conditions match the niche, but they fall rapidly when conditions change. And there is a modern mirror to these ancient truths. In the space of a few centuries, human activity has altered climate, carved habitats into fragments, and moved species around the globe with dizzying speed. Species vanish under pressures that have few precedents in the fossil record for their speed and breadth. If the ancient extinctions were chapters of slow geological drama, ours reads like a hurried final act. What will future paleontologists read in our strata? Will they find a sudden layer rich with plastics and ash? Will they read the signatures of shifting isotopes and loss? What odd forms of life today will become tomorrow's fossils? Even in untouched corners of the planet, unknown species may exist. Deep-sea trenches, subterranean caverns, and dense tropical canopies may harbour life that makes even Opabinia look conservative. If we value the thrill of discovery, we must also accept the responsibility of stewardship.
But back to our fossils. They whisper of beauty and brutality with equal quietness. They teach us that the Earth's experiments have never stopped. For every oddity that vanished, countless others rose to take its place. We can read the stories of creatures such as Archaeopteryx, with feathers and teeth stepping towards flight and a bird-like future. We see Dinosaurus with its massive arms and a hump that suggests a life more complex than brute force. We watch Spinosaurus, naval hunter and land stalker, a creature that dissolved the boundary between water and land in a single silhouette. These are not merely curiosities. They are proof that life will always try new things. Nature is creative to a fault. Some of its inventions are beautiful, others grotesque, and many are both. Listen to the textures in fossil beds, the ripple marks, the tracks, the feeding traces, and you hear the daily lives of vanished creatures. They drilled for mollusks, they scratched for roots, they slurped plankton and chased with lightning reflexes. The fossil record is less a tomb and more a library. As we close our tale, ask yourself what the strangest creature might be today. Is it in the deep sea, with its bioluminescent signals and pressurized lives? Is it in a cave, translucent and blind? Or might it already live among us, unnoticed in a patch of rainforest, its gene pool dwindling before a scientist's net can capture it? The end need not be a tragedy if we learn the lesson fossils teach. Adaptability matters. Biodiversity matters. The presence of strange life is a sign of a vibrant planet, and its loss impoverishes our shared inheritance. So when you imagine Opabinia's 5 eyes scanning a Cambrian shoal, think also of the 5 senses we bring to our world. Think of the wonder of confronting the unknown, and think too of the fragility that accompanies every miracle of design.
Extinction is not merely an event to be mourned. It is a signal, a data point in Earth's long experiment. It tells us about resilience, about thresholds, and about the cost of change. The fossil whisper grows quieter as our story ends, but its message is clear. Marvel at the strangeness, respect the fragility, and ponder what will be left when our era becomes legend.
This is the climax and the resolution. The curtain falls on ancient actors. New players take the stage, and the audience, if there is one, watches, learns, and continues. As you step away from this tale, keep a few images with you. 5 glassy eyes, a whirl of teeth, claws the length of a person's arm, a bony tail that could end a fight in a single strike. Let those images linger, because the strangest creatures ever found do more than shock. They teach humility, they teach wonder, and they remind us that life, in any form, is both fleeting and magnificent. So when you look up at the sky tonight, know that you stand on the shoulders of a bizarre, relentless history. And in that knowledge, there is both comfort and a quiet alarm. The fossils will remain, their echoes will not fade. But what we do next, that is our chapter to write.